Hello everyone, thanks for coming by to hear what else I saw in the month of July that I didn't already tell you about. I've got another unusual mix of films to cover here, so let's get crack-a-lackin'. I did get to cap off my Independence Day with some 1776, as I hoped. I wasn't able to see the whole thing, but I caught the second half on TCM, picking it up right when the Congress is reading the first draft of the Declaration, and that was actually perfect. I don't need to see the whole 3-hour-long musical every year, and as I've said before, the first part has a couple songs that I'm not a big fan of, but it just doesn't feel right to me to celebrate the 4th of July without recalling exactly what happened on that day, and the last section of 1776, which is packed with great lines and significant historical moments as the Declaration is debated, voted on, and signed, really captures that. But I didn't watch the whole movie, so it doesn't count. Movie number 1 proper is 2016's Daylight's End, a post-apocalyptic actioner where a loner traveling across the US killing bloodthirsty vampire zombie creatures ends up assisting a community of survivors holed up in a police station. It stars Johnny Strong, who also produced and did some of the music, and he's definitely supposed to be Mr. Cool Guy. But, from the very beginning, and I'm not saying this is Johnny Strong's fault, it could be the director, it could be anyone, I don't know. I felt the movie was trying way too hard to present him as this mysterious, too cool for school, end-of-the-world hotshot. And it just made me roll my eyes. I don't like that kind of thing. I like a cool protagonist in this kind of movie, but the coolness should speak for itself. You shouldn't have to sell it so hard. You shouldn't be working so hard to convince me that this guy is cool. If you try too hard, you end up with the opposite result. Co-starring is Lance Henriksen as the head of the police station group, who's none too pleased when our hero shows up. The movie's entertaining enough, and it gets the job done. If you like zombie movies, you're bound to enjoy it to some degree, but it's unoriginal, borrowing heavily from The Last Man on Earth, Omega Man, I Am Legend scenario. It's got a lower budget feel, which I don't fault the movie for, but it has a filter over most scenes that bothered my eyes after a while, so I also had a physical reason for not enjoying it so much. Movie number 2 is a viewer recommendation, 1954's Shield for Murder. Edmund O'Brien plays a good cop gone bad. He commits a murder and then tries to cover it up, unaware there was a witness who saw everything. John Agar co-stars as his fellow detective and former protege, who takes the case hoping to clear his mentor of suspicion, but becomes disturbed by the red flags. It's kind of a sordid story, where you may begin to feel a little sympathy for the character and say, well, okay, it seems like maybe he just wanted to do this. But then he does something else, and it's like, nope, never mind. It's got an interesting collection of supporting actors that includes Marla English as the forlorn girlfriend, Emil Meyer as the captain, and Carolyn Jones as a young woman who flirts with O'Brien at a bar. O'Brien did especially well in noirish thrillers. See DOA, White Heat, The Hitchhiker, and he goes all in with this character, making himself quite ornery and repulsive. I can't say I really enjoyed the story, but it was a pretty good movie. Movie number 3 is 2017's 6 Days, based on the 1980 diplomatic crisis in which an Iranian terrorist group took over the embassy in England and held its occupants hostage. The film stars Mark Strong as a police negotiator, Jamie Bell as a soldier in the rescue operation, and Abby Cornish as a BBC reporter covering events on the street. I liked Strong's character and his performance, but Bell was bland and Cornish added little to the story. Her inclusion was a nice nod to the real reporter and her groundbreaking journalism, but Cornish mostly just stands there looking kind of bored, and sometimes a little smug, which didn't seem appropriate, but maybe I just was misreading her expression. According to the film, the response to the crisis was not smooth. On the contrary, the operation seems messy and poorly handled, and because there is little more than a few vaguely 70s-style cars, outfits, hairdos, glasses, and mustaches to remind you that this is the past, you can easily forget that we're in 1980 and the procedure for dealing with terrorists and hostage situations wasn't as developed then as it is now. It's a compelling story and should have been a more compelling movie, but while it delivers on some points, I thought the way it was filmed was kind of lackluster. Movie number 4 is 2023's Cocaine Bear, which, believe it or not, is inspired by a true story. A drug smuggling hiccup leads to a plane load of cocaine dropping into a national park in Georgia, where a black bear finds it, gets hooked, and goes on a crack-addled rampage. The rampage is the fictional part. Like many, I was drawn in by the crazy premise and advertising. Just the title alone is enough to pique your interest. Cocaine Bear? Is that about what I think it's going to be about? In a way, the movie was every bit as quirky and bombastic as I anticipated. And yet, it struggled to meet my expectations. It just wasn't as funny as I thought it would be. I barely cracked a smile for the first 20 to 30 minutes, and I was thinking, oh boy, this is rough. Nor was the gore as extreme as I expected, and that was kind of a bummer because I was all set for something totally outrageous and over the top. We did eventually get there, but it felt like it took a while. I don't mind that the first part gave so much time to introducing the characters as they approached the park. I actually appreciated that. But most of these characters weren't exactly likable, so I still didn't care very much whether they survived or ended up being bear fodder. And I think I was supposed to care, at least a little bit. I did like how certain characters changed or turned out to be different than you originally thought, and I enjoyed the intersection of the groups in the woods. I'll also say that I felt the jokes got better as the carnage increased. The more gruesome it became, the more the humor landed, which overall made the movie better. The second half made up for some early shortcomings and even proved to be a little heartwarming. But I did come away with a tiny sense of dissatisfaction. Movie number 5 is a viewer recommendation from a few years ago, 1988's Miracle Mile. Anthony Edwards and Mare Winningham star in this apocalyptic romance, drama, thriller. Edwards plays a dorky musician who meets Winningham's perfect girl while he's on a trip in LA. But after spending the day together, their idealistic love story is cut short when he intercepts a call alerting him that nuclear war has begun and retaliatory strikes are on their way. Confusion gives way to panic as he tries to find his new girlfriend and get them both to safety before LA possibly blows up. I feel really dumb admitting this, but for some reason, I don't know why, I was under the impression that this was a dark comedy, and it took me a good half hour to realize I was wrong. It is not a comedy. It does have a few light moments, but it's more a grim evaluation of how people might react if they were told the world is going to end in 2 hours. They don't take it well. Stories like this will often show the best and the worst of humanity in a crisis, but this definitely emphasized the worst. And while there was nothing I hadn't seen before, because I've watched more than my share of nuke movies and apocalypse movies, it was a lot. My mom had seen the movie a couple times before, and I think she liked it more than I did. Not that I didn't like it, but it wasn't an experience I particularly enjoyed or would want to have again. It's a good film, though, with a strong narrative, some neat photography, and music by Tangerine Dream, which adds heavily to the nightmarish, is this really happening, ambiance. Movie number 6 was recommended to me by a few people, and I now realize I held off on seeing it for far too long. It's the 1944 Powell and Pressburger film, A Canterbury Tale, in which a land girl, a British soldier, and an American GI get off the train one stop before Canterbury and wind up hanging around town together to solve the mystery of who's been out at night putting glue in young ladies' hair. If you're thinking that sounds absurd, I completely understand. Every time I looked up the movie before, my reaction was, it's about what? And it's 2 hours long? However, I know better than to underestimate the archers. Yes, it's about unmasking the identity of the Glue Man, but it's about so much more than that. It's about the people, the conversations they have, and the connections they make. It's about a tiny pocket of the world and its history. It's about keeping the past alive and holding on to a dream and making faulty assumptions. And it's about the rural way of life that presses on in spite of war. Now, if I were a big-time Geoffrey Chaucer fangirl, I would have been over the moon at all the allusions and the reverent nods to the Canterbury Tales here. As it is, I didn't like the Canterbury Tales either time I had to study them, so that's one aspect of the film that didn't mean much to me. But as a lover of classic literature, I do appreciate it, but what made a much deeper impression on me is that this is a beautiful film. The cinematography, of course, is sublime, but the way the characters were not just photographed, but written, is lovely. The writing is great. There are many humorous lines of dialogue, and the final 15 or 20 minutes or so was the perfect culmination of everything that came before. I had no idea that it was going to turn out that way. It was uplifting and surprisingly moving. Regarding the cast, I have seen Eric Portman in a few other things, but the last time I saw him was in Corridor of Mirrors, and I so disliked him in that movie that I wasn't exactly thrilled to see him here, but he redeemed himself with his subtle performance. Sheila Sim is equally perfect in her role, Dennis Price is suitably crafty, and Sergeant John Sweet, a real-life U.S. Army sergeant who was stationed overseas, was handpicked by Powell and Pressburger for his starring role. This was his only film appearance, and he was great. Quintessentially American without feeling like an exaggeration, and he complemented all that English charm quite nicely. I so enjoyed this film. I've thought about it many times since I watched it a week ago, and I know I'll be revisiting it in the future. Movie number 7 is another viewer recommendation from a couple years ago, 2002's Hero, a Chinese historical martial arts film about the forthcoming unification of the warring states and assassins from those states who want to stop the king from conquering them. This is not a movie I would have chosen for myself because, as I've said before, I'm not into martial arts at all, and I don't like prolonged fight scenes. That kind of thing is the centerpiece here, plus it's done in the fantastical style of films like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, meaning there's a lot of spinning and flying and physics-defying, which I find particularly disengaging. Of course I understand that it's intended to be special effects heavy, and the emphasis is meant to be on art rather than realism, but that doesn't change things for me. Clearly, I'm not the target audience here. Visually, it's a striking film. The use of color to delineate segments of storytelling was interesting, and the music was noteworthy, featuring violinist Itzhak Perlman. Again and again, I was surprised, confused by the narrative, which is complex and disjointed with some Rashomon-like twists, but I never felt much of a connection to the plot or the characters. I wasn't into the romance either, so there were multiple reasons why this just wasn't for me. Movie number 8 is 2022's Devotion, a war drama about the first black naval aviator, Ensign Jesse Brown, played by Jonathan Majors, and the growing friendship between him and a fellow pilot as they head into the Korean War. This was a lower-profile production that didn't make a lot of noise when it came out last year. Supposedly, it was most popular with older people and veterans, not exactly a demographic that whips up a lot of social media buzz, but it's a safe bet that any movie that crowd likes is going to be a movie that I like. Plus, it was based on a book by Adam Makos, who specializes in war stories about heroism and unlikely friendships. My dad's read 2 of his books, not this one. So I had a good feeling about this movie, and it delivered. It tells a really good personal story, and it's well acted, especially in the more dramatic and moving moments. There were things that I wished went a little differently, but it's based on a true story, and I certainly would prefer that they stick to the truth instead of trying to Hollywoodize it. It does have that problem that's become more prevalent in newer movies, where dialogue is sometimes muddled. It might be because of background noise, or it might just be that the actors aren't speaking as clearly. My dad finds this especially frustrating. I don't always have an issue with it, but when I do, it's really annoying. And as we were watching this, I did think to myself that dialogue in old movies is often much easier to understand. On a side note, I've now seen Glenn Powell play some sort of aviator 3 times. Can someone be typecast as a handsome pilot? In all seriousness, though, that doesn't seem to be the case. He was a producer on the film, and it sounds like he was actually the one pushing for this adaptation to be made, and then he was asked to co-star. It is a funny coincidence, though. Movie number 9 is 1950's Wagon Master, a John Ford film in which 2 young guys, Ben Johnson and Harry Carey Jr., agree to escort a Mormon wagon train westward. Along the way, they encounter a snake oil salesman and a band of outlaws. This is a smaller-scale Ford film, in that it's black and white, it's under 90 minutes, and it doesn't have the epic scope of some of his other westerns. It's probably most known for inspiring the long-running TV series Wagon Train. But this is still undeniably a Ford film, featuring various members of his stock company, the Monuments Valley, and his signature style. It's an ode to a specific time and place in American history, and it's a fun movie. Mostly light, except for a few darker moments. We get a decent collection of character types, and Ward Bond eats up his scenes as the Mormon leader who struggles to keep his language and temper in check. I have no idea, by the way, if this is an accurate depiction of early Mormons. Also, from a purely clinical standpoint, it was interesting to see Ben Johnson in another movie, since last time I saw him in She Wore a Yellow Ribbon, I kind of developed a crush. I've seen him in movies before that, and I never took particular notice of him. I was never into him before, so I don't know what that's all about. So this was kind of a test to see if I really fancy the actor now, or if it was just his character in that one movie. The verdict is still out, because he was pretty attractive here. So further research is required. And that takes care of July. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoyed the selection this time. As always, you can find a list of the movies in the description. Let me know your thoughts on any you might have seen in the comments below, and I'll be back next week with another review. Thanks for watching.